You're listening to a Brother Asks and Building Better Builders video education series production.
Welcome to the CraftsmenOnline podcast, the only 5-star rated Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York. Any opinions, thoughts, or viewpoints shared during this program are that of the individual and do not reflect the official position of any Grand Lodge, appendant, or concordant body from which that member may hail. I'm your host, Brother Michael Arce, co-founder of CraftsmenOnline.com, and you've joined us for our conversation on what all candidates should be told as we welcome back for the first time in 2023. Our first episode together in a new year, Brother John S. Nagy. Welcome back, Coach.
Thanks again for having me, Brother Michael. It's an honor and a privilege.
Well, I'm excited to have you back on this conversation because you and I have had this talk before. From the first time that we have an interested gentleman or prospect who maybe shows some interest in Freemasonry, visits a lodge, to what we can or should say to them before they come into the night for their first EA degree. We're going to cover all of these points when it comes to taking that obligation and being a good Mason in the craft. So whether you're a 50-year member, recently obligated, entered apprentice, you know that you have to kind of mentally prepare for questions that come from guys who maybe have an interest in Masonry. Before we really get started here, I'm just curious, what have you learned over the years when it comes to fielding some of these questions that can go, well, just about every field in the ballpark?
Good Lord, Michael, every single last one of them that come up and knock on the door or ask for a petition or even just ask about Freemasonry, they've got their own unique understanding and their own unique misunderstandings of what the craft is, what it has to offer, how it operates, and what it actually does.
I was a part of the North Star program, as we call it in New York State, which is how we help interested gentlemen find a lodge. We're part of, it's a mentorship program, basically. We work with them in visiting lodges and answering a lot of these questions. I've heard a bunch. It's been interesting to see, I would say, pre-COVID and post-COVID, the questions that I've gotten. I would say pre-COVID, a lot of the questions are a typical thing, is sometimes into the conspiracy theory, Illuminati, very basic questions. And it seemed like, to me, at least post-COVID, the questions became more researched, more thoughtful, more, hey, tell me about the Scottish Rite, or who is this Hiram Abiff? And I'm like, whoa, like, that's pretty deep for someone that's just now showing an interest in the craft.
Absolutely. And to field those kind of questions, you really, if you've had good Masonic training, you respond in a Socratic method. You ask them questions back. You don't try to sell the craft. Good God, if you try to sell the craft, the first thing that's going to happen is they're going to pick up on the fact that you're trying to inflate it and make it more than it actually is. And that's a huge, huge mistake.
Yeah.
Let the interest of the seeker drive the conversation. Answer honestly, but honestly and briefly. And don't try to over-explain anything. Just answer the exact question and leave it almost like a blunt yes or no, so that it opens the door for them to say, well, expand on that. Because the idea is to get into a conversation. It's about developing the relationship with the person, the seeker coming in. And if you start with good, honest, short and concise responses, and of course, turning around and asking questions as to ask about Freemasonry. Well, what do you know about it?
Right.
What have you been told? Who did you hear it from? Where did you find this information? And get that flow going on and use their responses to provide return questions to help the seeker recognize that there's much more to be asking other than the superficial stuff. You actually will train them to expect more out of the craft. And by God, we really do need to expect more from the craft when it comes to the seekers coming in.
Agreed. And I like the way you position that, where I found it as a bit of anyone that's been ever in a sales role. There is a little bit of the, not so much you're trying to sell them on Freemasonry, but kind of the first rule of selling is listening, active listening, and finding out what they're looking for and asking the right questions, as you said, to see if it's a good fit. But also it's almost a little bit of HR or a job interview, where, as you were, I think, alluding to, which is you also want to see if this gentleman is a good fit for your lodge and also the craft in general. And if you start getting some like warning flags, it's like, okay, maybe we need to, reposition things or set some expectations. I know that we weren't having an episode on our unicorns around the campfire, but one of the myths that I've discovered just in the conversations with, men that are interested in Freemasonry recently was gentleman was sitting next to me at an airport bar and said, noticed my ring. And he was like, oh, my grandfather was a Freemason. And I always thought you guys would call or come knocking on my door someday. And I'm like, why? He's like, well, isn't that what you do? You reach out to the grandchildren of Masons or the sons of Masons to see if they'll join. And I was like, no, but in the back of my mind, I'm like, that might be a pretty good idea, but no, we don't do that. So I think that's the biggest myth is we are never going to ask you. You need to ask us to start the conversation.
And yet that has been changing over the years. I've seen one jurisdiction after the other give permission to approach the topic of joining at least once and then letting it go if there's interest or disinterest, not to pursue it after that first statement. Like, you'd make a good Mason.
Right.
I know that I'm seeing a cascade of jurisdictions where that is becoming more and more permissible and actually encouraged by certain jurisdictions. And I've got my reservations about that.
Well,
I'm
let's get
one,
to that part. Like, what do you feel is that appropriate amount, or what bases should we cover when it comes to having those initial discussions on Freemasonry?
that's a great question. And once again, I'm going to have to default to what I said originally. Let them drive the conversation. Don't volunteer too much too soon. In fact, even as they're going into the petition, into becoming a candidate and going through the door, don't volunteer too much. Let them drive the conversation, and let them drive the exploration of different aspects. The more that they drive it, the more you're going to be able to ascertain how interested they are. And if you shove a lot of information down their throats, they're not the one pursuing the opportunity. And I'm one who is very much an advocate of attraction versus promotion. And it might very well come from my 12-step days. I recognized very, very quickly during my 12-step days that if you promote 12-step, you're basically going to get a lot of people who are coming in because they've basically been kind of convinced to come in, as opposed to individuals opening the door because they really wanted to come through it.
Right.
And I like the Joseph Campbell's analogy. What you want is somebody likened to a man with his hair set on fire for a bucket of water who's willing to gnaw through a brick wall to gain access to a bucket of water. I like enthusiastic people who absolutely drive the conversation because they have a burning desire to know more about what is being offered. And the same thing applies to the craft. If they really truly want to know, well, start picking their brains. Why is this driving you? Why is this so important? And it may
Right.
very well be you've got a host of different typical responses, like I had a family member and I want to continue the tradition. I know a very close blood relative who joined because he thought that there was going to be a lot more mystery and history being conveyed that wasn't being conveyed through the usual channels. And he was sadly disappointed in that realm, but he was absolutely enjoying the fact that there was a lot hidden in plain sight that he wasn't able to pick up with in the beginning, and the exploration of those hidden in plain sight symbols and words and what have you gained an interest that he didn't really anticipate till he joined.
Right. I find that a lot of the conversations end up that I have with interested gentlemen or prospects or whatever term, your jurisdiction or lodge uses tends to be more experiential based, where I will just share with them like what led me to become a Freemason, what I've gotten out of it. what I'm looking for or seeking for in life. And they're like, oh, okay. Because I think at the end of the day, if you kind of keep it on those really simple lessons that we talk about in the craft, like making good men better, well, how has Freemasonry improved my life? Simple things like, hey, until I was a Freemason, I would have never known how to tie a self-tied bow tie. Would have never happened. Before Freemasonry, I didn't have a group of very diverse brothers, not only in ages, backgrounds, religions, traditions, whatever, that I regularly met with and felt comfortable being around. Until I became a Freemason, I never had, a bookcase full of books on everything from history to ancient poetry and other religious books to study and try to glean wisdom from. Before I was a Freemason, I had never heard of Coach Nagy or benefited from any of his wisdom. So these are all things that like I work into a conversation. And even, I say it in jest, but even the Coach Nagy parts, like finding mentors in life, it doesn't matter, I think, what age you are, all men are seeking that. The other thing is kind of building on that is when I talked about active listening, when we listen for what they're looking for, we don't have to ask that question, because I swear to God, I would give somebody $100 if I asked them, hey, what are you looking for to join Freemasonry? Well, in 5 to 7 years, I think I'd like to work my way through the East, become past master of this lodge, and move on to a district deputy position or serve the Grand Line. They don't know anything about how, or don't ask them that question. Find out what their interests are. Like you had gave it as an example. If I was sitting with a man who was interested in history, I would try to think of lodges or lodge brothers in that area that do that I could guide him to or introduce him to.
There are individuals who are seeking Freemasonic affiliation because they simply want the experience of going through the rituals. They're not looking to become part of the line. They're not looking for anything other than just the experience and the affiliation. And I think we do a great disservice to that particular group of individuals. I have a close friend who had no interest whatsoever in the memorization, and the guy would make an absolute fantastic member. Just don't expect him to do any kind of line activity. And it's unfortunate he dropped off totally. He just dropped off because once he figured out he had to memorize to advance to the next degree, he lost total interest. It wasn't why he was joining. He wanted the experience, number one. And the fundamental reason he was joining is he wanted to be in the company of good men. He's going toward Social Security age, and what he wanted to do is have a place to pal around with good men. And because of the constraints, we won't have that good person in our lodge because he simply was not going to participate in the memorization that was required. So there are people out there, there are a classification of good men who would make great members, but they don't fit the criteria that most Grand Lodges put forth in order for them to advance. And it has nothing to do with their character. It has to do with their interest. Why are they joining? They're joining because they want to be with good men, not plug and play into the line to make more members.
And that's another strong point in every conversation I have with an interested gentleman, which usually goes for about an hour, I would say, if we really have the time to have a discussion. I would say within the 30-40 minute mark, they're like, oh man, this sounds great. I can't wait to, visit a lodge, or thank you for sharing, places. I always make this point. I'm like, there are two things I got to talk to you about that are almost required for you to be a master mason, which is where you're going to want to go. And it's really important that you know this, and it's time and it's money. And you are going to have to put in the time to go through the 3 degrees that we have. They're very basic. And as John had said, some jurisdictions require like 100% proficiency of the ritual, memorizing it. Others, like my other jurisdiction here in DC, they'll just require that in some lodges, it'll be you just have to be able to read it or be aware of some of the key points of it. But either way, this isn't an instant gratification. This is not like joining the Elks or the bowling groups or the Lions. Well, those are all great organizations. Freemasonry is not like that. The second part is the money thing. I'm very open about that, that we do have to pay dues every year. If you get behind in your dues after a certain amount of time, they will try to reach out with you to work it out. But if that is an issue, Freemasonry might not be the best fit for you. Yes, some lodges have wonderful social dinners or other outings or charitable things that you can give to. It's not required that you do that, but paying your lodge dues every year is required.
And add to all that, that I like to tell interested parties that they're going to have to contend with a huge range of personalities. And each and every one of them places different value on how members participate. And there are ritualists, there are the esoterics, and you got a whole range of different interests. And each one of these members have their own focus and their own set of values as to what's important and what could be basically put by the wayside. And again, I tell them that they have to contend with some sort of proficiency depending on their jurisdiction.
Right.
My particular jurisdiction required, well, I'll thumbnail it, about 6 pages of 8.5 by 11 memorization of Q&A, not the questions, but the answers that I had to contend with. And it became easier as it went, but I was told up front, yes, that's what you're going to have to do. And that you have to typically remember what to say when either asked a question or how to respond to a specific demand. And last but not least, I tell them in every single ceremony that they're going to go through, if they go through the first 3, the Blue Lodge degrees, they're going to be asked to do specific things and answer specific questions during the ceremony, and to always answer from your heart. And this is what I tell them before a petition even comes into the discussion.
Very good. Now we've got them up to that point. I think this is a great transition because we've covered a lot of the basics, I think, to getting in that interested gentleman into meeting the lodge. Now let's talk about them becoming a member. And this is a conversation that you and I have had because there have been times where I felt like maybe I stepped over the line a little bit in preparing a candidate on what you should, or well, let's just start there, what you should tell them. You have a gentleman who's standing outside the door, who's ready to take the knocks to come in and take his entered apprentice degree. He's clothed as an entered apprentice. He's in the preparation room. What does he need to know before going through that door?
I actually tackle a little bit before they get into that room. I tell them the ceremonies are purely symbolic, and they are going to be exposed to a tsunami of symbols, biblical scriptures, philosophical statements, all presented to them in an allegorical form. Then I ask them, do you understand what allegorical means? And we get into that conversation. And then I tell them that there's going to be at least 2 more follow-up degrees that will drive home the points of the very first degree. If you didn't get the first degree, the second and third are going to drive home the points as to how important that first degree actually is. And that the second and third degrees is going to assist in the carrying out of what the first degree, what is being asked of you through going through the first degree. And you're going to be asked to take on an obligation. And it's real simple. The obligation is going to cover 3 categories. One is it's going to give you an opportunity to commit to being a better man. And it's also going to give you an opportunity to commit to not ruining it for others who have yet to go through the degree.
Yeah.
I keep on saying you don't want to tell the last chapter of a book when they haven't even started reading it. And the same thing goes to others that haven't gone through each of these degrees. Don't ruin it for them. And last but not least, you're going to be given an opportunity to commit to supporting your brothers as you would have expecting them to support you. And the last one, I love saying this because this one kind of blows the mind of candidates before they even get to that door. I say anything in the degree that's designated as a secret is not a secret. And they look at me and say, what are you talking about? I say, okay, let me give you the caveat. You're being asked to treat specific things as if they were a secret. And this is to both develop and test your ability to be true to your word.
Hmm.
And it's all internalization of specific disciplines. And the whole idea behind telling somebody it's a secret and telling them if it's a secret, you don't share it, that is to, again, develop and test your maturity. Are you going to blab it, or are you going to keep silent and keep true to your word? And I usually get smiles because the individuals who think that through recognize, wow, that makes so much sense.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think I'm taking a note to use that. It's different for each of the 3 degrees. So I'll start with the first degree and we can come back together and talk about the second and the third. But for that first degree night, I remember what it was like in my experience, where I came to lodge the first time I ever had purchased a matching dark suit and tie, was so excited and came in and then was told, okay, go into this little room over here. You're going to put on this outfit. And I was like, but why am I wearing this dark suit? Well, that's what you're going to need to wear to lodge meetings after this. But for tonight, you got to wear this special pajama looking outfit. And I was like, okay, before I put this on, are you guys gonna do thing like, is this like a college fraternity? Like, is this where no. Are you telling me that George Washington, whose picture is all over the place in this building, he wore this, well, probably not the same outfit, but something similar, and he went through, yes, a lot of what you're gonna experience. And I trusted this gentleman who became my Masonic mentor of my mother lodge. I was like, okay, I will go through this. And then he prepared us for a couple things. And he talked about the responses. Because it is a ritual, we really don't have lines written for what if they don't say this or what if they don't do this. So at certain points, he said, you're going to be asked this question. This is kind of the answer that you need to give. You'll be asked this question, the 3 basic questions you get. I was like, okay, great. And that was pretty much it. I went through the whole thing. Now, when I, talk with an EA, I say, I'm going to use your line and say the secrets line. I love that. But I always say to them, take everything that you have read or researched on Freemasonry, put it into a temporary folder in your brain, because tonight is your first experience into Freemasonry. And after this, I'm going to ask you what the one burning question is in your mind. And then we can have a whole discussion on everything else that's out there. But just enjoy it. And I'll see you on the other side of this door. And then I go take my position in the lodge, whatever that may be.
If I don't have an opportunity to share this, because I'm not always involved in the candidate preparation, but I am on the back end playing music for the degree. And if given an opportunity to talk, I share pretty much this arrangement of words. Welcome to the fraternity. I might sometimes actually say, welcome to the hood.
Nice.
I didn't say hoodwink, but
Right.
but don't bump. I welcome you to the fraternity. Understand what you've just gone through. The experience is a roadmap of everything that you need to know to make yourself a better man. If you go back and review what was shown to you and what was said to you and what you said in response, you'll ascertain very quickly that you've got a roadmap that will allow you, if you follow it, to improve yourself as both a Mason and a man. If you don't follow it and you do not explore the terrain that the map points you toward, you'll probably be a great member, but without the work of following it, getting into the terrain, rolling up your sleeves and doing the work that the degree points you toward, you're not going to improve as you could.
Mm.
Your brothers are going to assist you in internalizing that map, hopefully not only in your head, but also in your heart. And if you explore that roadmap that's been internalized for each and every degree that you go through, you can't help but improve yourself. And that's what I'd say.
Yeah, no, and that's from the heart, and that's why you've written so many of these wonderful books. He knows the words. You know what to say. But I think hearing that and then going through the door and or even afterwards, because I always look at our newly obligated masons with such sorrow, because it's the whole fire hose that they just got sprayed with of Masonic knowledge, and maybe they can contain a simple teacup of that, and so many questions that come afterwards, which we in a good lodge cover with Masonic education leading up to the work in the fellowcraft degree. And even if you are in a great lodge, I mean, there are going to be questions that you will have that you really won't be able to piece together until maybe after you're a master mason and can go back and review the catechism or see the degree a few times and other things sprout up. But anyways, those are other episodes. I'm curious what I usually do from the EA now to the fellowcraft night. At that point, I've usually worked with the brother slash candidate on their proficiency in the EA degree, so they're ready for the fellowcraft degree. In our Masonic education nights, I've covered like, hey, and so for the next degree, it's going to build on this. It's pretty much going to be the same. Very familiar, few little changes. You should really enjoy it. I don't really get much into prepping them for the second degree because of it is what it is.
And what I do, if they are curious enough to ask me, I say, there was something very special told to you in the entered apprentice degree that both points out your purpose and what you have to obtain in order for that purpose to even begin. The fellowcraft degree will give you the missing pieces. If you're not aware of them already, this fellowcraft degree will give you tools that you can internalize such that you can accomplish the purpose that was set before you in the entered apprentice degree.
Mm.
And I leave it at that.
Yeah, no, I love that part because it really does. Like the story to me really picks up in the second degree, especially the second half of it. And all of us that have done it know exactly what I'm talking about. Now you're walking out going, okay, now I'm this story of building this temple is now in my mind. I can actually start envisioning the architecture plans and the floors being built and where it's supposed to go. Okay, this is all starting to make sense. Then we get to the third degree, and I do prepare the candidate or brother a little bit more deeply in the third degree, much like I would in the first degree, letting them know, especially at one key part. And I think it's important that every lodge does this because you just don't know. You don't know what this guy has been through in life and what could literally trigger him and set him off to where he could become violent in a defensive tactic because he felt threatened, right? So I think it's very important that let the brother know at the second half, you are portraying a part. Some things are going to be asked of you. Don't worry. No one's going to hurt you. It's all going to be good. And again, I'll see you on the other side, and we can talk about what this whole raising thing means to being a sublime master mason, because it's going to have a lot of different meanings, and I can't wait to have that conversation with you. See you later. And I go switch over to my chair. How about you?
I kind of hint at this. I say, you're literally going to be carried through
Mm.
to the very end. So enjoy the ride.
I like that.
Well, thank you. That goes back to the root of the word tragedy and the drama and the indication of riding the goat.
Right.
Occasionally I'll say, did you bring your chafing cream? But that's when I know the person and I'm teasing them and they know I'm teasing them. But I always say when they ask me, I say, well, if you did the work of the previous degrees, this is going to be a celebration of everything you accomplished.
Mm.
And the smart ones turn around and say, well, what if I didn't complete the work of the previous degrees? And I say, well, then what you're going to be exposed to is what happens when you don't.
Mm.
And then they get this serious look and they say, should I be worried? I said, no, because no matter how you come into the degree, you're going to be presented what happens to people who do finish the work and what happens to people who don't finish the work of the previous degrees. And you'll have further incentive to work upon yourself as a consequence of participating in this degree.
I like that because it really sets up to the next question, which I know we could do a whole episode on this, and I feel bad asking you this one, John, but how do you, depending on whether you really know this brother at this point or just maybe little limited exchange with him by coming to lodge meetings and degrees, but how do you set that newly raised sublime degree master mason, how do you set him on his path for Masonic knowledge and his journey?
I'm really blunt. I say to whoever asks me, I say, do you feel you completed your temple yet? The answer inevitably comes back either no, or the temple never gets completed. They want to get real philosophical. And I look at them and I say, you might want to reconsider what you're saying. Quite honestly, the temple was supposed to be completed before you went through the degree. And if you believe the temple can never be completed, you're skewing your focus and you're defining the temple in a way that is adversarial to what the first two degrees are pointing out. If you go back and re-examine it, and if you want my help, I can be your tour guide. I'll point out exactly what that temple is, how you go about to complete it. And it is only then that you start working on your spiritual building after you complete the temple. And usually the question comes back, aren't they the same thing? No, they really aren't. One precedes the other, and you can't have that spiritual building even started without completing your temple first.
This has been the Craftsman Online podcast. It's so good to hear his voice and to get to see him again. Big thanks for coming back for 2023. Brother John Nagy, good to see you.
It's great to be back, Brother Michael, and I look forward to a prosperous new year.
Me too. If you've enjoyed this episode and you want to hear more, you can just tell Siri or Alexa to play the Craftsman Online podcast. We're available on all streaming platforms with new episodes every Monday morning. And if you've really enjoyed this episode or others, it does a whole bunch for us. It takes a few minutes or a few seconds for you, but a lifetime of help for us. Just give us a nice little like or leave one of those comments in a review. We appreciate that in advance. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.
You've been listening to a Brother Asks and Building Better Builders video education series production.